Hey, everybody, I'm Scott Wikle. You're listening to My Kind of Country. Thank you so much for joining us on a Monday night. I have a very special guest, and this is kind of a unique subject for our show, but I think that our listeners are really going to love what's the message is in these books that this gentleman has written, and he's got some really interesting stuff to share with us today. He's also worked in the field of country music as a video producer, a writer, and a director, and he is currently producing the Perley Curtis show that is airing on RFD TV. And it's a pleasure to welcome the author of two Christian fiction books, The Devil Plays Six Strings and The Devil and the Dance Hall Girl. This is Vince Pinkerton. Vince, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, it's an honor, and I want to thank Jennifer Herron for getting us in touch. And we were talking off air before we got on tonight that you and I have met, and I got to spend some time together with Freddie Hart and David Frizzell.
Oh, yeah, it was a great afternoon.
And it certainly was a lot of fun. And then, of course, you're working with the great Perley Curtis, and he played steel guitar for Freddie Hart's final album that David and I worked on while we were in town that week. And it's called God Bless You. And so he played on that. Eugene Moles played on it, and we had a blast.
Oh, yeah, they're great guys. I was actually, just before we called, was shooting an interview here in my studio with Perley. So, it's part of the Perley's Place TV show that we do for RFD, just doing an interview to help get a little more word out about that. So he's a neat guy. He is.
He's a great friend. He's such a nice guy, and I'm so glad that he's getting the recognition he deserves, because he's such a monster player and singer and just a great personality.
Oh, absolutely. And he's got just such a good band with him on Perley's Place. It's just amazing. It's so much fun to do those shows.
Oh, absolutely. Where do you guys record those at?
Those are done at the Troubadour Theater.
Okay.
In Nashville. It used to be the Texas Troubadour Theater, but it changed hands and they took the Texas part off of it. So
okay.
It's the Troubadour Theater.
Yeah, it looks like they've done a pretty extensive remodel in there too.
They really did. It used to be set up kind of like the Ryman with pews in it, and they've taken that out, put in a dance floor, and I've just really upended the stage, got the better lighting, better sound in there. They've done an amazing job with it.
Oh, that's great. The Perley Curtis show airs on RFD TV. You can check your listings for air times for that, and make sure you check that out. Of course, we play a lot of Perley's fantastic music on our show, and he's been a guest on my show several times, so check that out, folks. Well, Vince, first of all, I guess what I really want to ask is, how did you end up deciding to write books?
Well, that's a good question, and I'll try to keep this short, but I did a lot of writing in college. I did a lot of short story writing and stuff in college, and kind of had the bug but didn't follow it through. And then over the last 30 years being in Nashville, I've worked as a songwriter. I've worked as a commercial producer for television stations. So I was always writing, but it was always short form type situation. And then a business associate that I worked with and I got into a long discussion one afternoon after a business meeting about, at that point, horror movies. What made a good horror movie? What are the points of a horror movie? And he was rambling on about horror movies and talking about he'd love to maybe produce an independent movie. And I saw an idea. I said, well, maybe if he's wanting to produce a movie, maybe I need to write a script. And he had an idea for a movie, and I sat down and started trying to write a script for that idea, and it was terrible. What I came up with was just awful. But it got the bug back in to me to write. So I sat down, and I don't know what made me think of this, but I sat down and gave myself a task. I said, I'm going to write a conversation between two people when one of the people can only speak in Bible verses, but I want it to be conversational. Could I do that? And I did. And it turned out kind of interesting. I showed it to my wife, and she said, well, this is really interesting. It's kind of weird, but it works. And that became a part of the first book, which is The Devil Plays Six Strings. The main character, Elijah Parker, after some pretty harrowing things in his life, ends up speaking only in Bible verses. So I had that conversation between him and his son, who I named Happy. And it just really stuck with me. So I started working backwards and forwards from that one little section. And that's where the book came from. It came from just a test I gave myself to see if I could do it.
Wow. Well, it's amazingly well written, and it really I guess with you being a producer, it makes sense because as I'm reading the books, I really can visualize it. It's like a story playing out in your head, so I can almost see a movie here. So maybe that's something down the line for you. I'm sure you thought of that.
Well, that would be great, absolutely, and that's a great compliment because that's what I was shooting for. When I read, and I read a lot, it's the books that I forget I'm reading, and the words translate into pictures in my mind while I'm reading. Those are the ones that I like the best, and that was really what I was trying to do, was just paint some very vivid pictures.
Well, I have to admit, I read a lot too, but what I normally read are nonfiction. I read a lot of biographies and, of course, a lot of music stuff, because I don't read a lot of fiction. And when I started reading the first book, I was just there, and before I realized it, I was halfway through, and it just seemed like it was a minute, and I was just all in the story. So you had me hooked.
Well, great. That's what I like to hear.
And I love that, there's some very non-sugar coated real life stories in this book, and there's lessons to be learned. And without giving too much away in the book, you were talking about Elijah, who had lost his wife during childbirth, right? And
right, Seraphina, yeah.
And he really had to figure out how to survive with the raising a child. And then a man in a black car, mysterious black car, gives him a job and offers him everything he wants, and kind of ends up that sometimes you got to be careful what you ask for, I guess is the way to put it.
Exactly. Yeah. He needed a miracle, and he got one, but sometimes miracles come at a cost.
Yeah. And this guy's name is Mr. Give. I love that. And it doesn't take too much to figure out who Mr. Give really is as you read the book.
Yeah, he makes it clear pretty quickly once he shows up in the story.
Yeah, and
I'll tell you, when I wrote the first book, which you and I have met, but for the listeners, I'm a 57-year-old white guy living in Nashville. But I wrote that book set in southern Mississippi in 1930, and as the book progresses over about a 20-year period. And when I wrote that, obviously there's a lot of Elijah is a black sharecropper who now is dealing with, trying to figure out how to survive with a newborn in that part of the country at that time in the country's history. I was a little hesitant as I was writing it as to, am I sugarcoating this? What I'm like, say, I'm a white guy. What do I know about what these people really went through? And it was really worrisome to me when I finished the book, and my wife read it, and she liked it. And again, she said, you sure you want to put this out? Because you're really getting into some stuff. And another show I do, along with Perley's Place, is I produce Dr. Bobby Jones Presents for the Impact Network. And if people don't know who Dr. Bobby Jones is, he is considered the Ed Sullivan of gospel music. He's been a pioneer in black gospel for over 50 years at this point. And I produced one of his TV shows. And I took it to him, and I said, Doc, I'm going to give you this book. And just read it and tell me what you think. I didn't preface with anything. I didn't even tell him what it was about. Just read it and tell me what you think. And about a week later, I was at his house doing some editing, and I said, did you get a chance to read the book? And he said, yeah. He said, I liked it. And he just kind of stopped. And I went, okay, that's what you say to people when you don't want to hurt their feelings. I said, I need to think about this. So I didn't bring it back up, and we finished our work, and I'm leaving, and when you work with Doc and you leave, he always walks out on the porch. He's a very gentlemanly fella. Always walks out on the porch. I was just about to get in my truck, and he said, let me ask you something. And I said, what, Doc? He said, how did you do that? And I said, do what? And he said, how did you get it right? In your book, how did you get it right? And I thought, okay, that's what I needed to hear. Mm-hmm. And that led to about a half-hour conversation, with him. And part of it is, Doc is 84. And he was in Nashville and working at the time of the race sit-ins at the lunch counters. And I've heard him and the people he worked with talk a lot about what life was like then. And it was pretty easy to incorporate that along with other stories I've heard, and seeing it honestly from the other side. Right. Seeing how people I knew, older white people that I knew, how they treated black people at the time. So it was just it was a really nice confirmation for him to just tell me I got it right.
Folks, before we get too far along, I do want to mention that Vince's website is sixstringdevil.com, and it's with the number 6. We will have that information on our Facebook page for My Kind of Country. You can get more information on these great books that he has there. Also available at Amazon.com and Kindle and Kindle Unlimited, and paperback and hardcover too. If you are one of those people that likes to have a book in your hands, you can get both. Vince, that's something I was going to kind of ask about, doing research for this and getting it right. I mean, did you do a lot of research into the time period and the area, or just, like you said, just getting stories from other people?
It was mainly just getting stories from other people. I did do some research into the general area. I don't put them in a real place because I didn't want to do that. I created the little town all this takes place in, which I got away from in the second book. There's real places all over the second book. But in the first book, yeah, it was just, reading histories, reading people's accounts of what life was like back then. But then again, like I say, it was mostly just talking to folks and trying to picture what it was like in that period. I tell the story a lot. There's a thing in the book, in the second half of the book, when Elijah's son Happy he's now 20 and it's 1950 and he's fighting his own demons, I guess you could say. It starts out with he's hauling garbage for restaurants. But he's always at the back door. It's always offers, hey, come by after hours and I'll give you something. And I had Happy, anytime he was talking to a white store owner, he takes his hat off. He always wears a hat. He takes his hat off and he holds it against his chest and he doesn't make eye contact. And that came directly from a man when I was growing up. I always knew him as Mr. George. I don't know if that was his real name or not. But he was a black man that lived about 4 miles from us. And he would come help my grandfather, who lived next door to us, help him around the farm, around the garden. And I just remember as a kid that anytime George would come help, if my grandfather, he had the hat on. If my grandfather said something to him, or my grandmother, or even me, as a 7-year-old kid, came up to him, that hat came off when he spoke to us. And that really just always struck me. So I wrote that into Happy's character, and Dr. Jones brought that up and said, that was something that people learned.
Wow. That,
if you were going to get along, that was a way of being respectful. Even if you didn't want to be respectful, you did it because that was how it's done. Mm-hmm. So it's things like that. I was able to work some real life experience into those stories as well.
Well, I guess that's why I gravitated toward these books so much. It's really a history lesson, even though it's fiction, but it's still based on true life. And I guess maybe that's why I really got so taken in by these books.
Yeah, I tried to keep it as real as I could, for sure.
Yes, for sure. Well, tell me about the second book. It is called The Devil and the Dance Hall Girl. And some of the same characters are in this book. I don't think it's really what I would consider a sequel, but a continuation of a story, maybe.
Yeah, it's kind of adjacent to the first book. Well, when I was writing the first book and Elijah makes his deal with Mr. Gibb, Elijah has said all along, if I could just have a place for us to live, a little food on the table, and somebody to help me raise my child. And all of a sudden, Mr. Gibb shows up, and that's what he offers him. He says, if you'll come play a little guitar for me in my nightclub, I'll give you a house, a little money in your pocket, food on the table, and I'll give you somebody to help raise that baby. And he's good to his word. And all of a sudden, Elijah and Happy are given a small cottage, and when they show up, there is a white woman there, and her name is Marie, and Marie can't talk. She doesn't speak. I would love to say I knew ahead of time what I was doing when I wrote that into the first book, but I wanted there to be a communication problem between them. So I just made it where she couldn't speak. And, a relationship develops there. Marie cares for them, but it gets stronger relationship as the story progresses. And then Marie is used as a pawn by Mr. Gibb against Elijah. Mm-hmm. to try to keep him in control. Marie's just in the middle of the book. But after I finished it, her character just really kept weighing on me Why can't she speak? Why is she in a position that Mr. Give, or the devil, if you will, can tell her what to do, tell her you're going to live with this person, tell her you're going to meet his every need? Why is she in that position? And that's where The Devil and the Dance Hall Girl came out of. I wanted to write Marie's story. And I wanted to do something different where Devil Plays Six String is extremely grounded in a realistic time period. I play around a little bit more with it in Dance Hall Girl. I've created the world that if you're working for Mr. Give happily, then I think I said something like you never grow old, do anything you want, no repercussions to your life, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's where Marie comes in. Marie's story starts at a stage relay station in the plains out west, shortly after the Civil War. And the book starts, it's pretty graphic. A cowboy comes out of nowhere and basically, kills her family off except for her, and she luckily gets away. And that starts her story. That is a very hard life for a child. She goes from having her family killed to basically being adopted into a second family in a brothel in a mining town. Where she, there's some lessons learned there, but then again, something happens and she's forced out on her own. And by the time she's 16, she's singing in saloons outside in Kansas City. And Mr. Give shows up there, and she figures out who he is real quick. And she's quick to tell him, look, the first half of my life has been a living hell. I'm not afraid of hell. If you can get me out of this life, I'll do whatever you want. And she makes her deal and starts off on, she's having a good time. She can do anything she wants as long as she's helping him, as I put it in the book, helping him sway people over to his way of thinking. But then she meets a young man named Joseph Mann, who is kind, gentle guitar player whose goal is to get on the Grand Ole Opry. And she's very taken with him. She's very motherly toward him because he's so innocent and he's so just unspoiled. But Joe introduces her to a minister that we call Pastor Mike, and a love affair blooms between Marie and Pastor Mike. And now all of a sudden, here we have people playing for two totally opposite teams that are trying to make things work, and it doesn't go too well.
It really makes you think, and there's really some life-altering things that take place in these books, and I think when you kind of read between the lines, you'll understand what I'm saying, again, without giving too much away.
There is, I wanted to put in there are lessons about faith and about trusting your faith and putting your trust or putting your power, well, let's say where you put your power. Do you put your power in sin? Do you put your power in your faith? There's a lot in there. This really was what I was wanting to get to in these books, along with just telling good stories. That it's where you put your power. It's where you decide you're going to be in life and the path that you follow.
You've done an amazingly great job on them, and I hope that folks will pick these up. And I hope this is not the only two that we're going to hear from. I hope you'll do more.
It's not. I am working my way through a third book that is. It's not part of this series. There will be another book in the Devil series, as I call it. But this next book is called Legacy, and it is not directly related, but it is related. And to try to make that make sense, some of these characters show up. One thing you will learn in Legacy is why Marie's family was killed. There was a reason. It was not random. But it does not have the, for lack of a better term, the faith and religious content that the first two books does. This one is more of a straight, we'll call it a mystery thriller.
Okay.
But I've tied it into that same world. I wanted to explain some things and fluff up some other things that were in the first two books. But this story didn't feel like it lended itself to the faith end of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the third book, I have the synopsis for the third book in the series, which will be called The Devil and the Disciple. Hopefully that comes out around the holidays next year.
Folks, go to sixstringdevil.com or amazon.com, and you can pick up both of these books, The Devil Plays Six Strings and The Devil and the Dance Hall Girl, written by Vince Pinkerton. I highly recommend them. And Vince, living in Nashville in the country music world, and who are some people that you've worked with and some favorites that you have in the business?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I love David Frizzell. We mentioned him earlier. I've known David for years. Done a couple of music videos with him. Bobby Marquez, not quite as well known, but just a great singer, songwriter, entertainer. I've worked with him for ages now. But I've done things like I was a cameraman for the Opry for a few years, so got to meet and interact with a lot of folks there. A lot of great singers, songwriters that are starting out. It's a fun community to work in.
All right, folks, again, sixstringdevil.com is the website. Vince Pinkerton's fabulous books, The Devil Plays Six Strings and The Devil and the Dance Hall Girl. Make sure you pick these up, and we'll have that information on our Facebook page. And, Vince, we're going to play some music from Perley and from Bobby and some of these great artists that we talked about today, too. How's that?
Sounds great. I'm ready for it.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you taking the time to be on My Kind of Country.
Oh, thanks for having me, Scott.
What's the deal? Who's the joker? The cards are stacked against her. They're two of a kind, bound to fold, no hand to hold. I shuffled through the clubs and thought I aced this game. Drew me a queen of hearts and dealt her my last name. She bet on a bluff, threw in a full house. That wild card made us go bust. What's the deal? I'm the joker. The chips are down and I lost her. But they're two of a kind, bound to fold, no hand to hold. Oh, take it away, boys. Only flips for diamonds, so let's call a spade a spade. Our new king better get it straight, 'cause he's the next to be played. What's the deal? We're the jokers, nothing up our sleeve to hold her, but we're two of a kind, bound to fold, no hand to hold. We're two of a kind, bound to fold, no hand to hold. Yeah, we're two of a kind, bound to fold, no hand to hold.